Call the meeting to order. There are,
Let me,
go ahead, Chris, you want to do that? Yes.
yeah, entonces, si están aquí escuchando y necesitan traducción al español, tenemos la opción ahí al fondo de su pantalla, dice interpretación y hay un globo. Nomás necesitan seleccionar ahí, pueden seleccionar al español y van a poder escuchar a los traductores que tenemos, los intérpretes. Gracias. And Dawn, at some point, I'll make that announcement again, just in case people join late.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We did have a closed session, and I have nothing to report out from the closed session. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda?
We do not.
And let's see, we have Judy. Okay, we're kind of.
I'm ready.
Judy, I know you're ready. And now I'm just wondering where, do we have Mike and Araceli?
Araceli is in. I don't see Mike.
Okay, please stand for the pledge.
Okay.
There's the flag.
It's a lovely flag.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike will be joining right now.
Excellent. Okay. So we can continue on. Public comments on agenda items we'll be doing with each agenda item. If there are any comments on non-agenda items, please send those in a chat message to Karen Mendoza, and she will alert us. Now would be the time we would be doing that, but if they trickle in over the next few minutes, we will make time for those.
And of course, you could put in for an agenda item public comment right now too, just so we have it ahead of time. That'll help us be able to. So,
that would be helpful. Yes. Okay, so Karen, you'll let us know if anything comes in.
Yes.
So moving on to item 8.1, student learning, the new LCAP, but it's not LCAP, learning continuity and attendance plan. The same acronym, different beast.
Good evening. So in the packet, you have the actual finalized document, the learning continuity and attendance plan that we reviewed in our last regularly scheduled board meeting and had a public hearing for. No major changes. SCO has reviewed the document. We had two tiny little suggestions, just providing some clarity about what ELA and math programs we're using. And then one small fiscal change where they thought that we could count one of the items towards meeting, contributing to contributing to the helping not unduplicated students. So no major changes. We checked one box and added a couple lines to clarify what math and ELA programs we're using. So I think we're ready to go ahead and ask for an approval on this. We will deliver it to SCO one more time. They'll do a review. If there are any major reviews, and I don't anticipate they do because they read the draft, we would come back to you with any changes. We will get this translated into Spanish language and posted with the CDE and on our website to memorialize the planning process. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions, any comments from the board?
No.
Mike?
On page 9 of the document, it talks about special ed, English language ordinance, etc. I like what I see. Or when, I'm assuming that yet we're not engaged in person-to-person, do you anticipate that happening? Because particularly those two groups and others, all mentioned in that document, are going to need a little bit more attention than the fun Zoom thing that we're doing. Do you have a timeline on when that we might begin?
Well, I will say that English learners and students with disabilities continue to receive services through distance learning. So we are providing designated ELD in small groups with the classroom teacher, and in designated ELD sections for junior high and high school. We've continued, as we've talked before, to work on our integrated ELD program and are providing training. Much of the training that you guys approved in the last board meeting is now kicked off officially. Students with disabilities, my goodness, those case carriers are working as hard as ever. And Diane, I don't know if you want to speak to continuity of services for special education students. If you wanted to hop in.
Yeah, much like what we've reported before, but I think what they've really tried to do with the individual distance learning plans is dial in what each student needs. Some students respond really well to distance learning in small group, and some students require more one-on-one. So you'll see case managers trying to differentiate based on what each student needs. And to answer your question, yeah, we look forward to the time we can start talking about small cohorts, and we would love to plan for that. So
yeah, so that conversation, we'll start with you all, but we'll continue with you all tonight, and the idea of at some point when it's safe, providing in-person services for English learners and students with disabilities. That is a priority, and we'll discuss that later in the reopening, or pardon me, in the opening. I don't even know what we're calling it at this point.
So
factors and timeline for reopening of schools. It's agenda item 8.1C. So we'll get into that a little bit more detail.
And part of the special education, as I recall earlier conversations, was how do we assess them? I imagine some you can do distance, but also some needs to be done in person. And again, is there any thoughts as to when them? And I totally agree with what Director Fender was saying. We got it when we come back, we come back. But prior to that, we had kind of a hopeful conversation about maybe we could bring them in one at a time, sit at the other end of the rooms or something. I don't know how that works, but I'm just wondering time-wise so we can meet the needs of the kids.
Yeah, so we're required within the first couple of weeks we do it of school to do initial LPAC testing, so the EL assessment that's state required. We had about 45 students who needed that assessment, and we did complete that one-on-one. So we have completed our obligation for initial LPAC. We actually have the scores back, and families will be getting those scores, in the mail. Hopefully tomorrow we're going to get them in the mail, so they'll get them next week. So initial LPAC has been completed. I'm going to be giving
Aaron, if I could stop it, and everyone's comfortable with the Zoomy stuff and the validity, I guess, of.
So those were about 42 kindergartners of the 45, kinder and TK, and then a couple upper grade kids who are new to California school system. And those were done one-on-one in person outside. So those were done following our safety protocols with a retired staff member who's done LPAC testing as a proctor for us for many years. So we did conduct those in person.
Okay.
And other assessments have been done one-on-one in person. Isn't that, I mean, as needed, right?
Yeah, we've completed 3 special ed evaluations, and I think we're in the process of the 4th, and those are all done in person. And I think we're comfortable with the protocols. I haven't heard any.
Okay, and I guess that was my question.
And yeah, there is a concern about the validity of the instruments, but we've got some guidance from SCO and from the attorneys, and we will likely do a little bit more once we resume in person, but I think we've got a good start.
Okay.
And just to foreshadow, I'll be probably in November providing an update for you all on what's the situation with LPAC testing, an optional summative on our RFEP monitoring plan. So as part of this continuous improvement process for our ELD program, I'll be focusing on the testing and where we're at with RFEP.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I want to make the Spanish announcement real quick. Si están aquí escuchando y necesitan tener interpretación al español, pueden seleccionar el globo ahí al fondo donde dice Interpretation interpretación y pueden escuchar todo en español después.
Thank you.
Trustee
Gracias.
Romo Flores, you had a question?
Yeah, I just was curious. I can't remember, and you may have said this before, and I just can't remember. Did we finish the summative in the spring, the summative LPAC?
We got through all the junior high students, so we did complete for middle school students, grades 6 through 8. We did not for elementary and high school. So we're right now reaching out to families to offer the summative, optional summative LPAC to those students who have met all other RFEP criteria. We've got about 5 or 6 high school students. We're planning on offering remote testing for our high school students to complete the optional summative that didn't get the chance. And we think they could RFEP. And then we've got about 12 to 14 grades 2 through 5 students. And we are going to offer in-person in small groups, again, with our testing proctor, retired teacher, the same person that did the in-person over at the Fitch Mountain campus, largely outside. So in groups of probably about 3 to 4. And then for the speaking, we'll do one-on-one. So we're offering that to about 20 students, the optional, that didn't get the chance to take it back in the spring.
Thank you.
So Erin, it sounds like then there's a focus on focusing that test on students who are really close to reclassifying.
Yeah, that was the guidance from the county office. Yeah, and the city. Yeah, if we had kids that, you know, were lined up, everything was looking good, they just needed that 4 on the LPAC to focus our efforts for the optional summative on those students.
I mean, it's logical. It sounds very logical to approach that way. Is there a plan at another point during the school year to do testing across a broader range?
Yeah, we will have to. So we, the testing we're being told summative LPAC for every EL student will take place in the spring. And that we will, whether we're in full distance learning or whether we're in some kind of hybrid program, that all English learners will be taking a summative LPAC in the spring. It won't be waived like it was last year.
Very helpful. I know we've got a little off the actual LCAP learning continuity plan.
No, I mean, this is an important part of it. This is good. Yeah, and like I said, we'll do a deeper dive into the testing and RFEP and kind of where we're at a future board meeting. But this is highly relevant in my opinion. It's a very important part of our learning continuity.
And I want to thank you for this. You did the team that you led did a great job. So thank you for all your work with this.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of work. Yeah.
So any other questions or comments from the board, or do I have a motion to improve the learning continuity and attendance plan as presented?
So moved.
Second.
And this is not a resolution, is it? No. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Erin. On to a revised instructional calendar, because nothing is impacting this school year at all.
No, unfortunately, this becomes relevant once again. So Karen, do you want to put the slide up? So this is, last spring we negotiated with HADA a calendar that had incorporated 3 extra days for fire or smoke or flooding, depending on what kind of year it is. And so unfortunately, as we all know, we canceled school the first few days of the year. We did have the first day of school and then subsequently had to cancel a few days. And so we lost 3 days of instruction. And so we would like to trigger those dates that we had incorporated for that. So just real quickly, so everybody understands the mechanics of it, you are required by the state of California to have 180 days of school. We in Healdsburg actually have an extra day, probably the only district in Sonoma County that has an extra day. And so 1 day we have in excess already. And then we had 2 days that we had put on the calendar, January 4th, which was going to be a professional development day for staff, and then April 5th, which was to be sort of a holiday. We are proposing tonight to trigger those 2 to become student days to make up for the instructional loss during the Walbridge fire. One potentially positive thing out of this is it's more likely that in January and April we're going to have in-person learning, so we may have traded distance learning for in-person learning. which, hopefully that's the case, and that's a positive that comes out of it. But it's pretty straightforward. Any questions from the trustees?
I appreciate you finding that very slim silver lining, Chris,
Yeah.
on that. And will there be a replacement for the Staff Professional Development Day on January 4th?
No, unfortunately, we just lose that time. Yeah, we do have one in November coming up. I think it's the 2nd. So we're going to keep that day, and we'll be, providing some trainings and working with staff on different things. So they will have that.
Was there anything in particular scheduled for that day, or just held it open? Is it just like an open day to schedule? Or did you have something on the calendar?
We didn't have anything booked yet. I mean, in our heads it was scheduled, right? But
right.
Yeah. So it's stuff we either are going to have to delay or find a different way to deliver. So
okay. Thank you.
Any questions, concerns? No, it seems like, again, the right thing to do. And I
may have one public comment. I'm just
thank you, Karen.
I haven't heard back from the person yet.
Well, I'll ask a quick question while you're waiting, Karen.
Okay.
So then will we notify parents in the event that we approve this? Will we notify parents right away to let them know that these will now be instructional days? How do we?
Yeah. So we'll reissue the calendar to everybody in the district so they know. Absolutely.
Highlighted in red and yellow that
Yeah.
these days are back on.
So my question, I'm going to read this from Robin Doherty. She's wondering, were there any waivers available to apply to save the extra days? We still have rain and possible floods. We may need to use these days in the future.
You never know about the waiver process. It's a good question. We're going to apply for waivers, but it takes 6 months for CDE to approve them usually.
And Chris, could you explain, just really briefly explain what you mean by the waivers?
Yeah, so there's a process called the J13 through the California Department of Education, where if you have to close school for a variety of reasons, flood, smoke, fire, that you can apply for a waiver with the California Department of Education because you didn't meet the minimum instructional days or minutes. So we will.
Those days just disappear.
Correct.
We don't make them up. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, and we have never, this is the first year that we've actually built in alternative days for these instances, and that's a practice that was highly recommended by the California Department of Education. And in fact, they went to the length of saying that if you did not have alternative days on your calendar, they might not approve your waivers. And so we will be applying for the waivers so that we have days in our pocket, to use a metaphor, that in case of, God forbid, additional fire or flooding, or, with the fire that we've had in town, mudslides could be a real issue at some point, So there's definitely a good question, and it's something that we are going to be pursuing. So. And
it doesn't preclude us from requesting waivers for additional days.
No,
Heaven forbid, that might still be okay.
Correct. The fact that we have them on the day and that we've now triggered them will play in our favor in terms of them being approved in the future.
So I have a follow-up to that. If we get the waiver, then would we get those extra days back for the rainy days?
Good question.
My recommendation would be no, because I would like our students, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so I would like for our students to be able to have the opportunity to be in the classroom, whether it's on Zoom or in person learning. So I want to have them just in case of other days, and we'll continue to apply for waivers should they come. But I think it behooves us, and it's kind of a moral obligation given the fact that we have alternative days on our calendar, that we trigger them at the earliest possible moment when we have an issue. So
I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And my hope would be that, like you mentioned, that those would be real in-person days. That would be a win-win for sure. But I would expect for us to hold class on those extra days. Just saying.
Yeah. I mean, this is what they are for, in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Any, again, additional comments or questions? Any public comments? And are we ready for a motion?
I do not have any other public comment.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the revised calendar?
I'll move to adopt the revised district calendar.
Second.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Jamie, did you say aye?
I said aye. Sorry, my dogs are loud. Aye.
It's not that, it's just that I only have so many windows on my screen.
Oh, yes.
So thank
I,
you.
yeah.
That's all.
I'm
Dog or
turning my
not?
mic off and on. Sorry.
Next item, 81C, factors and timeline for reopening of schools. Chris.
Yeah, so Karen, if you want to go to that presentation. So I have created this as a way to both guide the board through and the public the different factors in terms of when we can and should reopen schools given the pandemic. And I will be the first to say that it is not clear. It is a very complicated issue, and it's my hope that I can do a good job just voicing the different obstacles that are there, the different challenges, and absolutely, I'll say this right now, as a parent, as an educator, I desperately want to get kids back in school. I think our staff feels the same way, but it has to be safe and it has to be sustainable when we choose to come back. And so we're going to speak to that through this presentation, and then we do have a resolution that follows it where the board needs to make a decision on declaring a time period to stay in distance learning. We certainly, there's no way Sonoma County gets out of the purple tier before November. And so it's just impossible. So we have that as a minimum. And then potentially we may decide to choose a longer period of time as a result of the conversation today. So if we can go to the next slide. So when I talk about how unclear it is, it behooves us to see that we get completely different guidance coming from the state and county at numerous times. And so you see here a reflection of how plans have changed. In fact, how we track COVID cases and how that affects the economy and when schools can reopen has changed 3 times in the 6 or so months that we've even been in the pandemic. And so it's really complicated here. We started with the Stronger Together as a guidebook for the safe reopening of California's public schools. It is a guide. It gives us different models we can use, but none of it is definitive. It's just choices you can make. There was a school reopening framework from SCO that came out in July. And then in late August, we have Governor Newsom's latest Blueprint for a Safer Economy, which is the guidance that we're using now. September 4th in Sonoma County specifically, if we are to reopen or apply for a waiver, we were informed that school districts now are required to do the contact tracing for, actually that was September 11th, excuse me, for students and staff, as well as making sure that staff are engaged in a continuous testing routine. And the idea would be to have all of our staff tested over a 2-month period, potentially at cost for the school district. And so I just want to stop there and let that sink in. At some point, the school districts have taken on the expectations of public health agencies. And I will be the first to say, I'm an educator. I can talk to you about teaching and how kids learn all day long. But I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a pandemic expert. I'm not a medical doctor. And so it just seems, for lack of a better term, unfair that this would be put on to school districts. That said, we are dealing with it. We have already done some contact tracing for some issues that have come up in satellite programs and with employees. We have 2 registered nurses that work for us that are doing a great job at doing it, but it is time consuming and would be a big task should we bring students back to school. So moving on to the next slide. You see here the Blueprint for a Safer Economy. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the mechanics of this. So currently, and this is actually an old chart, Sonoma County is in purple. That was just declared again yesterday. We are actually the only county now in the Bay Area. Contra Costa County just left purple for the red tier. That's still left in purple. And they measure 2 things. First, they measure the number of new cases that are coming out. And what they want to see is a factor, or 7 new cases for every 100,000 of population in the specific county. And then they measure the percentage of new tests that are coming out as positive. And so you see there that to be in red, you need to be between 4 and 7%. or 4 and 7 new cases per 100,000. And then you want positive results from 5 to 8% of all the COVID tests that are administered in the county. And they measure it from Tuesday or from Wednesday to Tuesday. And so you get the new data Wednesday morning, knowing where you're at, sometimes late Tuesday. So if you go on to the next slide, you will see how this is determined. So like I said, new cases per 100,000 must be 7 or lower to move to the red. So when we're looking at adjusted case rate, we want to be 7 or lower. Sonoma County has roughly 500,000 residents. And so our target number for new cases per day is 35 cases or less if we want to move to the red tier. Obviously our target is 0, right? But if we were to move to the red tier, it's 35. So then our weekly average, if we're measuring that across 7 days, you multiply 35 by 7, 245 new cases a week is our maximum, or we are going to stay in purple. So as you can see here, we have been solidly purple the last few weeks. Just late yesterday, it was announced that we continue to be in the purple category. I think the rate was 7.8% last week, or not 7.8%, 7.8 new cases per 100,000. And this is the data. This is the one measure that is keeping us in purple. If you go to the test positivity rate, where you need to be 4% to 7% in test positivity to be red, you can see we already meet that criteria as of last week. We were at 3.6% test positivity rate. So what that says is Sonoma County is administering a lot of tests, and the test positivity rate is good, but in terms of our population, the number of new cases is not. So this is troubling, certainly, and it is a bit confusing when you look at the new data. The other piece that bears mentioning is to be considered red for economic reasons, where different kinds of businesses can open up, you have to be meeting red criteria for 2 consecutive weeks. So if you have 1 week where you meet red and then you go back to purple and then you come back to red, that doesn't count. It has to be 2 consecutive weeks. And then the criteria for when you could do any sort of in-person learning without a waiver from your county health official for schools is 4 consecutive weeks in red. All right. So the fact that this last week, which was just declared yesterday, is purple, we're in purple tier still, means that it would be the very end of October before we could be even considering coming back to in-person classes if things improve. That said, if you read the Press Democrat this morning, and I kind of put that in capital this morning at the bottom of the slide there, the glass fire that has resulted in thousands of people being evacuated in Santa Rosa and sort of neighboring communities, Kenwood, has decimated the ranks in public health. So they're down staff, meaning they're not testing at the same rate that they've been testing at. In fact, not even getting to the state median. Therefore, what the state has sort of alluded to is that this next week, because of the number of people who aren't working and the tests that aren't being administered, we're most likely not going to be considered for any tier. The data will be irrelevant, and they're going to wait another week before they measure. And so if that's the case, now we're into the first week of November before we could even potentially explore the idea of reopening as a result. And like I said, we would need 4 straight weeks in the red to be able to consider it. If we come out for 1 week where it goes back up to purple, then you trigger that all over again, and you got to do 4 additional weeks. Any questions about that in terms of the blueprint for a safe economy from the trustees? Pretty straightforward. Okay. This next few slides, this is a guide that SCO put out, just kind of a guide for parents. This is on our website and for the public. In the purple tier, you really can't open. We're allowed to do really extremely small groups. So as we discussed at the beginning of the meeting, we could potentially bring back some of our special ed students, foster, homeless youth, as well as English learners in small groups, 5 to 6 kids. And do some sort of instruction in person with them in a variety of safe ways. We could also apply for a waiver for elementary age children. But again, part of that waiver is having different criteria. And one of those is that we have clear testing and contact tracing protocol in place. to my knowledge, there are very few, if any, public schools that have gone out for the waiver. None have been granted yet because the public health director, it was actually also in the Press Democrat this morning, she has to go through them, then go over them with the state health director. They both need to approve, and then they'll send it back to the district and somebody, or the private school or charter school, and the kids could come back. They haven't made it through any of them yet because of the fires. So because of the public health emergency that the fires present, they're not even looking at the waivers yet. So that's going to take some time. If you move to the red tier, you see that we can do a hybrid reopening with small cohorts of students. So that's what we thought we were going to be able to do this fall. We had planned on part of that. Part of our summer preparation was to do a hybrid return. But very quickly, you know, as everybody knows, COVID kind of carved a new course for us, and cases went up in the county. And so we found ourselves back not being able to do that. So we would need to be in red to be able to consider a hybrid reopening. And again, we have to be in red for 4 weeks straight before we can do it. And then if we could somehow make it to the orange tier, you can do a traditional reopening. You still need smaller cohorts and you need social distancing, but it'll depend on public health guidance. You can maybe not be 6 feet apart. You can be a little bit closer, but still students masked and everything else. And so those are our different options given the pandemic and the sort of measures that the state has put in place currently. Like I said, and hopefully this isn't the case, we've had 3 different measures from the state since this has begun. There's a chance they change it up again. We don't know, but this is the latest measure that was instituted in late August and what we're operating with now. So to the next slide. So purple tier waiver information, just so people understand. Dr. Harrington, who is the superintendent of schools for the county, and Dr. Mace, who's the director of public health for the county, both have advised us not to reopen or even consider reopening in purple. They're not advocating for waivers to be given. Doesn't mean they won't give them, because there's certain legal parameters that in which they can be given, but those are the requirements listed out there. Again, if we were to consider this, we would need to consult and negotiate with our labor bargaining units and notify parent organizations and get feedback from them, and then publish our elementary school reopening plans on our websites, and then have clear sanitation protocols in place with contact tracing and staff and student testing protocols in place. We can do most of those things. Negotiations, I believe, will take some time for understandable reasons. Teachers are concerned about coming back and if it's safe. And then the testing and contact tracing are 2 areas that I'm really concerned about. Should we bring large numbers of students back in? So that is the information on waivers. And just to sort of support that concern, we were given a presentation from Sonoma County Public Health a few weeks ago, and I wanted to share parts of it with you to understand sort of what we're up against if we are to consider reopening. If you can go to the next slide, Karen. So what they did is so preschools are allowed to open because they fall under the child care section of the law. They're not considered a school district. So what does the data show from the preschools who have been reopened in Sonoma County? So if you go to the next slide, there's just a quick look at the number by date of COVID cases that were reported from these preschools. And you can see as the summer, we start in March and we go into where we are in August and September, and cases have spiked, obviously, in these places. And then there's a very interesting, on the next slide, a very interesting test case. This is actually the comprehensive, I'm sorry. So there are 12 schools and facilities that have opened. 3 different clusters of COVID have come from those 12 with a total of 62 cases countywide. And that was as of 2 weeks ago. So I'm not sure if that's increased, but you can see from the preschool and daycares being open that cases are coming out. And this is the test case, this next slide. This is a place in Sonoma County, in northern Sonoma County, actually, so near and dear to us. And they had one person associated with their school test positive from COVID. And from that one person, you can go to the next one, Karen.
Sorry.
Yeah. From that one person, there were 30 cases as of September 15th that had come from it. So it was a cluster of 30 that came from one facility. The outbreak at that time when this information was presented to us was ongoing, and they had 11 different people that were still pending testing at that point, and were forced to close the facility for a 2-week period. And so you see here, my concern is that if we were to come back to in-person learning at some point, this could happen, and very quickly we're closing classes for a 2-week period, if not longer. And there are different rules around when you have to close a school, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. We really, I mean, all of us as educators want to be teaching kids. You can go to the next slide, Karen. There's nothing more we want than to be able to reopen and provide in-person learning for our students. And I've listed some factors there. One thing that is at the top of my mind right now is the social emotional health of our kids. Isolation, anxiety, like a pandemic kind of depression are prevalent. We're seeing that. We're trying to find ways to combat it, but we can only do so much in the current environment that we have. Assessments, you know, are a concern, and we're working on ways around that. As we talked about, obviously instruction and learning is going to be better in person. Having schools in session is an economic driver because people can return to their work routine. Parents have their kids taken care of during the day. And then the idea of community, right? It's really hard to build relationship and community on a screen, as we all know. Our kids need to be in school. They deserve more than we can offer in this distance environment. And I want everyone to hear loud and clear, we want to bring them back. But, and here's the but, there are challenges and there's obstacles and reasons why that might not be a good idea right now. So I started with a list of the obstacles. You know, obviously I've talked about this, contact tracing and testing, those first two. We are pursuing ways to be able to do that, but it is an endeavor. It will most likely involve hiring more staff, and it will come at a cost. Furthermore, the testing, you know, from what I hear, testing has improved, and we're working with the County Office of Education to engage in a testing service that we could actually administer here, and then it'd be sent to a lab that turns it around fairly quickly. And then we, of course, would be paying for that. So if we're able to secure that service, that's great. But from what I understand, rapid testing isn't the rule yet, although it seems to be improving. We also have a concern about OSHA audits and fines. So there was a well-documented case at the Santa Rosa Police Department of allegations that Santa Rosa PD did not do everything they could to keep their employees safe, and they have a very large fine that they're facing as a result. In fact, they had a detective who passed away of COVID. I think we all remember that in March. It stems from that. Public Health, Dr. Mace and Dr. Harrington together does not recommend opening. In fact, they wrote a letter that we've posted on our website. We actually translated and posted, recommending that school districts consider being closed through December. Because it's likely we're going to stay in the purple tier for a long time, a great deal of that time. And it's the best way to keep our staff and our students safe. So that's a recommendation we have from two authorities. There's an interesting, if you go to the next slide, Karen, there's an interesting website that's listed there from UCSF that calculates the risk of having a COVID positive person in your population. It specifically talks about schools, and it looks at your county. So you identify your county. Anybody can go on and plug numbers in. When I did this last week, if we were to bring back a group of 8 students, we had a 7.6% chance that one of them would have COVID.
8 students in a classroom, Chris? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, 8 students in a classroom. 16 students, or at a school, period, right?
At a school.
Of 16 students, there'd be a chance, you know, you double that, right? So 14.6, just about double. 32 students, it gets to 27.1. And then we start talking about whole school populations. There's an 81% chance if we brought the entire HES population back to school in a hybrid environment, we're gonna have a case. And it's basically 100% should you bring back a hybrid environment at the high school for 540 students. And
this is based on current
data.
Numbers, current cases and data, and yeah, okay, thank you.
And as we know, in the majority of children, they're asymptomatic, right? And so we saw that in the preschool data. So we have 100% chance of there being COVID, and what could one student do in the cohort that they're in at the high school and how it could spread exponentially as a result. So there's real risk there in terms of bringing kids back anytime soon. We have the recent case study about the preschools, which I've listed there. And then we have some, never do I want to say money needs to be a consideration or should be the deciding factor, but we do have a reality where we do not have insurance, and the state, in several different bills at the state level, the latest was AB 1384, that would limit school districts' liability for a student contracting COVID, have failed to pass. And so at this point, we are completely exposed as a district in terms of financial risk. We know we live in a litigious environment. And that's not a Sonoma County thing, that's a national thing. And again, legislators will hopefully be revisiting this, but we don't see anything happening before January, and it'll certainly take longer than January to get it done. So we do have a real risk in terms of we are completely liable should a student contract COVID at school. And we obviously expose the district to great financial risk as a result. Moving on to the next slide. Again, I mentioned this, Dr. Harrington and Dr. Mace have both come out recommending that schools do distance learning through December. That letter is posted on our website. We would also need to do some staffing consideration if we were going to bring staff back. We feel pretty good about where we're staffed at elementary, but we do, we actually administered 3 different surveys this summer with our families. How would people feel about coming back? Would they want their student to continue in distance learning? So we tried to set up cohorts of kids who would be in distance. Those obviously may have changed. So we'd have to do that process again, and then make sure we had the right number of staff so we could have a cohort who's distance learning and a cohort in person, and the hybrid model with much smaller class size in different places. So there's a lot of staffing considerations to be done. And then finally, I don't know that there's a safe way to do it for secondary students. If we are required to have cohorts that are integrous, meaning it's the same group of kids who don't mix with other groups of kids, in secondary, we don't have it set up that way. Students have different subjects that they take. They're at different levels for different things. At the high school, you can be a senior and in 3 different types of math classes, depending on where your math level is. You can have different elective choices, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is a huge hurdle, and I have yet to see anywhere that's really overcome it. But secondary cohorting is a big problem for us. And then we have the idea that the transitions, the disruptions that could happen should we reopen. So when you get 5% of a classroom with a positive, which basically for us would mean 1 student. If we were to have the 6-foot rule, which we'd be required to, we would be between 14 and 16 students in a class. So the rule is, per public health, 5% of students in a class have tested positive for COVID. You have to quarantine the class. Well, that's 1 kid, right? So all it takes is 1 case for the class to have to quarantine for 2 weeks. And then it's 5% of classrooms, or 5% actually of the total population of students and staff get infected. So at elementary school, it would be around 25 students who tested positive, or students and staff, some combination thereof, and we would have to close the school for a quarantine period of 2 weeks. As we saw in the preschool data that we looked at, that happened pretty quickly. And so it is likely, should we choose to reopen, that there's going to be a lot of back and forth, which I think would, in a lot of ways, be an unfair burden to families when they have childcare considerations to be making, and for our teachers. It's really hard to be transitioning back and forth between distance and in-person learning. We have flu season. Flu season is upon us already, right? We are all seeing the get your flu shot advertisements out there. And from what we're reading, there's going to be an inevitable surge of COVID-19 during flu season. We haven't accounted for that. So the likelihood that we would get 4 straight weeks in the middle of flu season of declining COVID cases is not high, I believe. And then lastly, this just bears saying, if we are going to reopen, we of course have to negotiate with our bargaining units. Our teachers, our classified staff have concerns, rightfully so, and we have to engage in a process to be able to do that. So that's just something that has to be taken into account before we can consider doing it. So with that, any questions about the obstacles that I've listed here?
I had a
Chris,
question. Go ahead.
I have a question. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll start with this one. Kind of working backwards. I understand that negotiations have to happen and a consensus and agreement has to be made, but has that process started yet?
Process begins next week of discussing it. So we did actually start engaging in the process over the summer and actually put quite a bit of time into it. And hopefully that would set a framework for moving forward. But very quickly we realized it wasn't going to happen. And then we had to pivot to distance learning. But we, I can say, and I don't know if any of the bargaining unit members who are on the negotiating team are on, but we've spent a lot of time negotiating this summer. So it is not going to be a quick and easy kind of negotiation by any means. Like I said, there are legitimate concerns about safety on the part of our staff. So, but we
I understand and I respect that. So
yeah.
Please hear me say that.
Yeah.
However, I would say this needs to happen. I mean, I would like to see that there be a plan in place, plan A, plan B. I'm a little uncomfortable with there not even being a plan right now. Right. I mean, and I respect the fact that there was, and then there was this, change from the governor. I respect and appreciate that for sure. We couldn't help but have to change the plan. But I would expect that there is a plan very soon, as fast as possible in the event, or here's the plan that we're going to put into place when we do meet the criteria. I'm just saying, as a trustee, that's what I would expect. And as a parent, I would expect that would be in the ready to implement.
Right. And we'll be working to that end. The other thing to keep in mind is it not only feels, but it's true that after every time we meet, the rules change, right? So now we have this idea that we have to contact trace and test. And so we're becoming de facto a wing of public health. And so the plans are going to change, and no matter what we've come up with, it's going to continue to change. So negotiating is going to be a reality probably all year long as this thing changes and the rules around it do. So, but yes, certainly we're going to put in the time to come up with some ideas of what coming back looks like when we're able to. So.
Yeah, I agree, Jamie. I think if the plan's in place, then we're ready to do it. Not that there's anything really happening quickly, but we're ready to at least act.
Yeah.
Without, yeah.
Agreed.
So I wanted, and we can get to more questions, and I don't know if there's going to be any public comments, but I wanted to close, and then we can get to questions or comments. And typically we have the public comment after I finish, or staff finishes, and then we can get to trustee questions. But we really have at this point 2 different options in my mind. We can choose to kind of do the 6 weeks at a time thing, where we decide to stay in distance learning in 6 weeks increments. There are some districts who have taken this approach, and just reassess as things continue to change. But I did write in here, I don't think it's likely that we're going to be able to return to in-person learning before the winter break. So I want to keep that in mind as we go. And then we have the other option, which is to declare distance learning through December. And then that gives us some time to come up with those plans, to reassess in November what we're looking at, and is it even going to be feasible to come back in January? We don't know that. We don't know how to answer that. I will say this. And it pains me to say this, like I said, as a parent and an educator, I want kids back in school. I don't think it's realistic we're going to be back in school before December, no matter what tack we take, for all the obstacles that I listed down there. And I think there is a case to be made in terms of stability and planning for parents when it comes to childcare, for stability and iterating and innovating for teachers when it comes to distance learning, so that they know this is what we're doing for the next few months, and we really need to continue to work hard at it. I mean, our staff are doing a great job, and we can always reflect and improve. We obviously, the social emotional health of our students is very important, and we're trying to find the most effective ways to serve our kids' needs in this environment, and that'll give us, it's kind of weird to say it, but it gives us time to try and get better at distance learning when it comes to SEL, social emotional learning. So my recommendation right now would be option 2. And like I said, it completely pains me to say it as a dad and a teacher. But I do think it's realistic. I think it is likely going to happen anyway. I don't think it's going to be sustainable for us in the middle of flu season with all these obstacles to be able to continue an in-person instruction when we come back for much time at all. So key dates to keep in mind, we have an October 21st board meeting. Our first trimester ends November 6th in elementary, November 18th board meeting, and then we do have a December board meeting, but hopefully we've got more information in November to be making some determinations. And we can always call a special meeting should things change. And I will be the first to say this, if somehow there is a miraculous turnaround and COVID just goes extinct somehow, or miraculously the vaccines are found and distributed and manufactured in the fastest way ever seen by the history of the human race, we could come back. We could choose to overturn our resolution, right? But like I said, I don't think any of that's likely. And it pains me to make this recommendation, but this is where I'm at. And I will say also, I've been speaking with my principals who have been speaking with our teachers, and unanimously the principals made this same recommendation. Not that anyone's happy with it, but it seems like the most reasonable, safe, and sustainable way of continuing right now. So with that, I'll stop. And Karen, do you have any comments?
I do. I have one comment that I'll make for Corinne Ephraim, and then it's the same question from I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Manisha Sachital. They're both wondering if the county or the state is asking, let's see, let me read that. Did the state or county give any additional funding for the testing, tracing that is now responsible of the school district?
No, so we did get additional funding for distance learning and anything associated with that from the state and federal government, actually. It's called CARES funding. And so we actually, should we come back, we've almost spent all of it already, to be totally honest and transparent. One of the things we did is hire at K2 enough teachers that we could go full-time in person if we got to a hybrid environment. And it's actually made a huge difference in distance learning for our teachers to be able to work with smaller groups and see more student engagement. So that was money well spent. That was below our staffing levels normally. And then all kinds of things like we are buying, for teachers and for the students who need it, earphones, microphone, earbuds, apparatus. Teachers all are entitled to a second screen. So they attach a second screen so they could do a PowerPoint presentation and have their Zoom class on another screen should they need it. So, and then we've heavily invested obviously in hotspots, and we have a couple hundred Chromebooks coming in very soon. And so we've invested most of that money already, and there has not been any provision for the increased cost of testing or contact tracing given since late August when they made that determination. So
I have one other public comment. Karen Reynolds, if you'd like to, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to back up Chris on this, on his decision. At Fitch Mountain campus, we're working really 3 weeks ahead, planning for 3-week packets for our students to pick up 3-week packets. And so we really need to know how far out we're planning for and to be able to do the best job that we can. And we're really working the 4 teachers, not just the one team, but the 4 teachers that are teaching each grade level are really trying to work together hand in hand to be giving the best education we can through distance learning. I'm going to tell you, I've never worked harder than I have since school has started, and I've always worked hard, but I'm spending so much more time planning and so much more time trying to find the best way to get this information across to the students. And I do feel like we're making some connections with these students, even though it's difficult. We had our students stay on for a half-hour office hour today where they actually had a recess, and we put them in breakout rooms and just let them enjoy one another. And so, you know, we're all trying to do different things to get them some connections. And I tell you, I'd much rather be in person with my students, but you know, I'm getting old, and for my own safety, I do have concerns. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you,
Karen.
And Karen's a 3rd grade teacher at Fitch Mountain, for those of you who don't know her.
I may have another question. I just need to ask if they would like to speak, or. Sorry.
Does anyone from the board have any questions of Chris at this point? Intersperse public questions also.
Okay, so I do have a question from Emily.
Podolak.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
I
V.
saw that she was on, and that's, yeah.
Yes.
Karen, could you take that PowerPoint presentation off the screen?
Yes. Thank you for, I get kind of, yes.
No, I understand.
So Emily's question, is there any possibility small groups of students, 3 to 5 kids at a time, can meet with their teacher once a week, socially distanced with masks, to just have more social and emotional connection at the elementary level?
So right now, no, without a waiver, we're not allowed to do that. We can, however, get small groups of students like that, should they be special ed students with special needs, should they be English learners or foster and homeless youth. So we can get kids who fit those categories. That is the only legally permissible way to get students on campus together. That said, you know, the waiver, you can apply for a waiver, as I spoke of earlier. So we could potentially pursue that. Like I said, no waivers have been granted in Sonoma County thus far, just because of the time issue. So those are our only options at this point. And it would have to be negotiated, which bears saying. So.
All right. Any other questions or comments, Karen, from the public?
I do not see any other comments. Emily says thank you.
Yeah, it's a good idea, and the kids need it. I mean, I
Yes.
completely understand where she's coming from, and it's not just elementary students, it's all the way up to high school seniors too. So
from the board, I mean, I can start. Everyone else is, I think, muted, so I'll start now. I 100% agree with you, Chris, from the fact that we all want all the kids back in school as quickly as possible, to the last detail about, I think for everybody's planning purposes, as one of our teachers, Karen, just mentioned, and for parents also, and looking at childcare issues, I think to try to push opening even crazy optimistically in mid-November, with a pretty good chance that there would be reasons for either one or multiple classrooms to then have to go back to virtual, back and forth. I think that creates more stress and more problems for our students and for our parents and for our teachers. So as hard as it is to make this decision, and there's no good decision here. I completely agree with you that I think if we just say now, distance learning through the end of the semester in December, it's the best of the not great options.
I have a couple questions, and then I'll kind of weigh in on what I'm thinking. I have a question around the secondary cohorts we were talking about. When will that restriction be lifted? If we're allowed to go back to campus, what's the threshold that we have to meet to be able to have kids not be in cohorts? Is there such a thing?
yeah, I think it's the yellow tier, and I'm not positive. And
Okay.
like I said, I haven't, you know, with the exception of one school district in El Cajon Valley in San Diego, I haven't heard of any high schools in California coming back. And I was going to reach out to them just because I'm really curious how they did it. So without completely reinventing the high school model and just tracking kids into classes they didn't choose, and, you know, putting them in a group of 14 that doesn't ever change throughout the day, like an elementary class, there's no real good way to do it. So there's a lot of work to be done to figure that out.
Okay, I was just curious
Yeah.
about that. I guess another question I had is considering, you know, just putting a date on this, a timestamp for later. How are things being tracked or monitored when it comes to student performance? So I'm concerned about we've got grades coming out not too long from now. Are the kids that are struggling, do we have some interventions planned for that? I mean, if we push this out and we just decide that we're gonna say not come back until this beginning of the second semester, what is that gonna look like for follow-up with students?
Yeah, so we actually, there's a lot of teachers have office hours, so there's time for kids to get help with their teachers. The other piece that we have in some of the schools is, I know at the high school they have a tutoring program. So there's you have the opportunity on Zoom to go and get help in English and math and I think science, and so there's opportunities for that. We do have intervention programs, right? So we have programs at every site for students who are behind in terms of math and English, and being able to, whether it's recoup credits or build their skills. So we have a lot of that in place, and it really will be about identifying the kids who need it and putting them into the right track and making sure they're followed up with. We are doing a really good job, I can tell you, because as a parent, I get the phone calls of letting people know if their kid is showing up on time to the Zooms. So we're doing a good job at that right now. Grades were just finalized this week at the high school, and I think last week at the junior high. So grade reports are going out, progress reports on the current semester. Families will get an accurate accounting of where their kids are at this point. And we are working with staff on what's the appropriate level of instruction right now and expectations for kids. You know, I sent out a district-wide email earlier this week, just outlining, because us as adults, we all have diminished capacities, right? And it talked about our surge capacity being tapped, and boy, is it tapped in Sonoma County between COVID and fires, right? And what are kids feeling as a result, and what is the expectation? How do we best reach our kids and manufacture wins for them and make sure they're learning at the same time, and not overwhelm them into this cycle of failure and depression that could potentially come if a kid's having a really hard time. So those are things we're actively working on as a staff together. And I'll be honest, it's hard to do strong social emotional work remotely on a screen, but we're putting our heads together, doing some research, and trying to find ways to do it better. So lots to be done still, but we're doing the best we can. I'm proud of the work that's been done. So.
I'm sure that is happening. I guess my concern is, I have a classroom full of kids, right? So I'm teaching, right, doing distance learning. And to say that I have office hours every day, which I do, 45 minutes, open classroom, kids can drop in. There are some kids that drop in, but it's the kids that want clarification or, right, am I doing this right? Those are the kids that drop in. The kids that are not dropping in, that I have to schedule time with, are the kids, right, that are doing really poorly. And so I guess I'm really concerned about if we set this future date, like, okay, and I understand why we would do that. My concern is those kids are gonna be like, oh, well, done deal. And then what kind of follow-up? These are high school grades, that especially that I'm concerned about. I'm not as concerned, I'm concerned about all students, but there's just this high school grade thing and those kids and their future that is just kind of heavy on my shoulders.
Right. And I can tell you that the classroom teachers are doing a great job of reaching out to kids who aren't engaging and turning work in. So I've seen that firsthand. So I am confident that it's happening. I also can tell you that our counselors are working overtime, not only pursuing kids to try and help troubleshoot, but taking calls from families that are concerned about their kids and trying to line them up with resources. So a lot of that is in place and going on. And my hope is that we get to a place where, we do tell kids, you're going to tutoring on Tuesday for math, and you're expected to show up, and the teachers are talking to each other. And like I said, that's happening to an extent already.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to go about doing this, but the parent who asked whether elementary school kids could meet with a teacher to get to know each other appropriately, I would really like you to explore that happening through when you're talking about negotiations or whatever.
Yeah.
The appropriate way to do that is, I think that it is critical for those kids to once a week have some kind of a connection with each other. And I think it will make it easier for those people, those little people to, I mean, I think it's true. If we could do it all the way up, it would be fabulous. But I really would like you to be pursuing something in your negotiations starting next Monday to facilitate some kind of in-person contact with kids.
Yeah, and that, you know, again, I'm 100% behind it. It would take us moving into a different tier to even be able to pursue it, but we certainly will.
Right,
talk about it.
right. And I think that it was Jamie who said, I think it's really important to have it all in place so
Correct.
that the minute it can happen, we can do that.
Yep. Yep. No, I agree. And I would encourage, you know, I'm a parent and we've done this with my kids. You find your little pod of kids of, you know, so for instance, my son, who's a sophomore at the high school, has 2 buddies that he gets together with regularly. And that's like his little COVID bubble. And they even do school together sometime, and they come and they have their earbuds on, they're Zooming, and during the break they can talk and interact, and it's a good, healthy thing. So
yes,
in the meantime, we can't facilitate it, but I'd encourage parents to look at ways to do that. So
yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And on the heels of that, Chris, too, I think applying for the rate waiver, or even if we can just, you know, put a crack in the window and however we can utilize that, I think whatever we can be asking for, we should be asking for or applying for or making possible for our campus kids. And so I just keep pushing forward. Whatever we need to do, just keep it pushing forward so we have it in our back pocket if we can use it.
Agreed.
And with that being said, are we kind of weighing in? Donna, are you asking us to weigh in on our opinions here? Is this time to weigh in?
Well, yeah. I mean, any more questions, concerns, anything that's unclear that we would need more information on to make a decision? But our next item here is a resolution about deciding how to move forward. So
for that, then.
I have a question, just looking even beyond whatever we decide now, whether this is a 6-week decision or whether it's a through the end of this semester, i.e. December decision. What's our timeline for deciding second semester, like after December?
Yep.
Yeah.
What?
Right. I would say, you know, as we've talked about, we'll begin negotiating right away. So we'll start different scenarios of what it would look like, you know. So do I think we're going to be in a place where everything's fine and we're going to be able to bring all kids back to school 100% of the time in person in January? I think that's highly unlikely, right? So at best, we're talking about a hybrid environment potentially. And so we'll engage in negotiations and planning and that with that assumption. That said, I think we're going to know more as this thing goes on into November, you know, so my hope is that in late November, early December, we're going to have some clarity around January, or at least be able to make the best informed decision we can. Clarity is probably not a word we should use during the pandemic, but we can choose to provide some clarity for our staff, our students, and our families. So that would be my recommendation, is that we're looking at the end of November, beginning of December. No, you know, by second week of December, we ought to have a decision made so families know how to plan accordingly. So, yeah.
Other questions, concerns?
Well, I mean, there's nothing I can add, but I like to talk, so I will. No, but I think what was just said is whether we come back in 6 weeks or in whatever is you know, early next year, it's all a gamble. And I've said it to the other trustees, I'm not willing to gamble. with the safety of our kids or with the safety of our staff. I hate this, and I don't have kids in school. I hate this. I'm not a teacher. I hate this. I'm not a parent. I'm not a kid. You go back there. I have kids in school. I'm not a kid, but I am absolutely concerned about the safety of our kids and our adults. And I know it's hard for the parents. I know it's hard for the kids. I know it's hard for the teachers. But my take on it right now is that we certainly go for the rest of the semester and hope to God that something happens where we can bring our kids back in, hopefully in January, but my guess it'll be more like February.
Other questions, comments? Do we have a consensus, or I mean, do we just go ahead and move to the next item and try to vote?
Why don't you go to the next item and someone can make a motion you could discuss and then vote.
I have one more public comment. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's with Corinne, and Corinne, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Maybe I'll even show my face. Hey.
Oh, interaction. Yay.
Yeah. It's really just a point. And by the way, thank you so much. I can't, just listening to you talk, Chris, is just completely overwhelming in terms of the amount of like steps and layers. It's just really crazy. So thank you I think you really conveyed it very clearly to us, and agree with you. As parents, we want our kids back in school. And I just wanted to say just a little piece that I've noticed with, you know, I have 2 kids, at least one of them. And what I've noticed is that distance learning, yes, it's hard in so many ways, but one of the things is that I think for certain kids and certain temperaments, that having to learn on a screen has another additional layer, which makes it even more difficult to learn. And there's some social and emotional pieces I think that come up for them, you know, with sort of the frustration and the struggles. And I think it's just good for us as parents and teachers and administrators to understand that when kids are learning online, it definitely adds, just like I think it was Karen said, she's working harder than she's ever worked before. I think that is also true for the students, our students, kids, that it requires, it just requires so much more than what they have ever had to do.
The executive functioning required for a kid to be able to function on screen and ignore all the distractions around them and show up on time and take notes and all of that, which almost automatically happens in a class with the teacher in front of you and your peers kind of doing the same thing. It's extraordinary level of executive functioning for kids. So I see it and I agree with you completely. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that point that the work is like especially for my freshmen coming in this year, the work is hard because it's right. Harder when you go to high school, but it's got another layer of difficulty because of the screen element as well. So yeah, it's a point.
Thank you, Corinne.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have one more public comment, and it's from Rose McAllister. Rose, if you want to unmute yourself. Hi, Rose.
Hi, everyone. I wasn't exactly camera ready, but here I am. I just want to thank you guys so much for everything that you've done. I know this is just an extraordinarily complicated process, and it is really difficult. And I agree with Mike. We all hate it for all the reasons. I guess the thing I wanted to mention just had to do with assessments, because I know you guys talked about assessments at the junior high and high school level, and I know that those are generally much more important for everyone's future and so on. But I think if we're looking at, you know, being out of school, at least for the first whole trimester, I just kind of wanted to mention that I think that for many families, maybe every family, you know, there's things going on at home that make it really, really difficult for kids to execute every part of their distance learning in a timely way. Or let's just say there's a lot of things that are out of kids' control. And I guess I just want that to figure into the conversation about assessments at the elementary level. You know, probably it's true at all levels, but, you know, the fact that we have to have 3 separate learning spaces in our house all happening at the same time, and that we only have, especially during harvest, 1 adult at home to kind of manage everybody's stuff. And I just think that probably every family is struggling with some of those things. And when we think about the kids' assessments, I feel like that's where the rubber meets the road, because it's one thing when the teacher kind of understands the flow of your family. We also have, like, I help take care of my mom, and we need to leave sometimes during class. And the expectation that our youngest son is going to be on Zoom from 8 a.m. until noon, you know, 4 days a week is a lot when you figure in other people's schedules, and it's a lot, period. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think, you know, I often hear the teachers kind of saying, well, do you have so-and-so materials? And I just have a sense that having every material when you're supposed to have it, being able to have quiet all the time, all these things impact the learning experience. And again, it just, where the rubber meets the road is at the assessment time. So that's all. Thanks.
Appreciate it, Rose. I had, when I emailed the staff this week, I talked about we need to give each other grace, and we need to give our kids a bit of grace too. And Greta, thank you for your response, by the way. I see you there. But yeah, to that point,
I think you should almost send that email that you sent to staff to, like, parents, to our community, because
yeah,
it's
an incredibly difficult time. Yeah. So
yeah.
What did Greta's letter say?
Oh, she just talked about how all the different ways she experiences grace in the district, and it was a really nice response and a reminder to be thankful. And so, yeah.
And Chris's letter was very much just, it was very empathetic and compassionate to our staff around this, around allowing for grace for yourself and for your students and for families. And it's something we all should be doing for now. So, any other comments at this point? Karen, any public comments?
That looks like that's all of them. Thank you.
So
Then I recommend, go ahead.
Oh, so thank you, Donna. So yeah, so I agree with Chris that I just, for the greater good, I mean, my son too, he wants to go back to school so desperately. He misses the structure of the class setting. He misses his friends. It's his senior year. He really wants to go back. But I agree, for the greater good of the students and the staff, I can't, in good conscience, ask that we return any sooner than December, or the next, in January, probably.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Should we move to the next item?
Yes, I think so. To 81D, and this is the resolution. And as far as I can tell, we basically are filling in a date.
Yeah. So if we were to, I'll give you the date. So if we were going to call the first semester, it's through December 18th. And that would be, you know, that's the date that we would insert into this resolution. So we would need a motion, and then we can discuss it if we need to, and then vote.
So we would, need a motion with that date. Correct.
I move we adopt the resolution number 2107 with the date filled in as December 18th, 2020.
I second.
Judy, you're off.
You're muted.
Oh, well, I made the motion.
Oh, I didn't give it to Judy.
Oh.
No. Don't.
You can
I
mime the motion.
muted it because of I did it because of my husband. He's making noise.
So we had a motion by Mike and a second by Araceli.
And
All right.
And this is a roll call vote. So
Anybody have any more discussion or questions before we do it?
No, this is.
Okay.
I'd like to share. I would like to just recognize the incredible work that I know the teachers are doing. I hear the teachers that are speaking. It is unbelievable what it takes to get everything in a digital platform, or to get all the material ready to send home with your kids. It's unbelievable. And on the flip side, I recognize the stretch it is for students to be in a digital environment for an extended amount of time. And I am the first to, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm one of 6 of us at least on the board, including Mr. Vanden Heuvel, that wants our kids back in the classrooms. And as a teacher myself, I want my kids back in the classroom. As a parent with kids, I want my kids back in the classroom. But I am in support of having them stay at status quo until we can come up with a plan and have it be hopefully more just a healthy situation, and we're in more of a situation where we have more opportunities because of our regulations. Again, let's pray for that, if I'm allowed to say that. And I would vote that we would, or I'm going to give my support that we stay closed or distance learning only until the start of the second semester, with the caveat that we are ready to roll. So I won't be here for that second part. So I will be the one that will be here on the meeting asking, what's going on? So I respect and appreciate all the hard work that's being done. So
Jamie, if I could just add to your compliments to everyone and to the parents. It's got to be incredible watching your kids struggle. And I use myself as an example. Even one of my kids who's very techie, it's got to be tremendously hard and heartbreaking to not have your child in front of their teachers. So to all of the people involved, the whole community involved, it's tough. And I was just noticing this is our last article, and it's kind of a lousy way to end a board meeting. But anyhow, but that's it.
So I think we're ready to vote. Karen, do you want to do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, roll call vote. Trustee Velasquez?
Aye.
Trustee Kiff?
Aye.
Trustee Romo Flores?
Aye.
Trustee Patmaso?
Aye.
And President Del Rey?
Aye.
All right.
Yeah. Well, not an upbeat way, but at least a inclusive way.
I was going to say
end.
thank you, I guess. It's not what any of us want. It's not what our kids need necessarily, but it is the right thing to do, I think, right, given the circumstances. So I appreciate your support and your, we have to put the health and well-being of our students and our staff above everything else. So.
Yep, we do.
Okay, folks. Thank you, everybody. At this point, our next meeting isn't until October 18th, unless there's a need, hopefully not, for a special board meeting. But
actually, October 21st.
21st, sorry, thank you. And now we're into October tomorrow. When did that happen?
Well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
I would like to say thank you to Jose and Angela for translating tonight. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Gracias, Jose.
Yes.
Very good. And Kristen, there'll be announcements going out, or how this will
Yeah, we'll be pushing information out this week. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
I will close the meeting.
Thank you.
Bye.